the slightly irritating things about the free will and determinism debate, which I keep having with myself and other folk, is that whichever one you go for, if you press it hard enough, keep pursuing it long enough, sooner or later you're ending up sounding like a mystic. And that's the case regardless of whether you advocate free will or you advocate determinism. Either one, when pushed to its logical conclusions, seem to demand some kind of a, or at least suggest some kind of a mystical, almost religious explanation, really. You know, if you're an advocate of free will, I guess I'm talking about someone like yourself, Pyro 314, if you push that line and you argue for the autonomy of the kind of Cartesian subject with the power to, you know, initiate action uncaused, the power to you know, act autonomously and apparently outside of chains of causality. If you advocate that, and if I'm mischaracterising you, Piero, I apologise. But if you do that, then you end up starting to sound like you're arguing for the existence of a soul. That's what it sounds like, the uncaused cause, the primum mobile written small inside your heart. You know, it starts to sound like that. And the fact that it ignores causality and demands a kind of ignoring of causal chains, again, just suggests that it's a deeply mystical idea. And when people invoke quantum mechanics as some kind of touchstone of science associated with that, it gets even worse, you know. Everybody starts to sound like Deepak Chopra when they do that, and so the whole thing collapses into a quasi-theological position if you argue rigorously for free will. But the opposite is, in a sense, is no better. You know, if you argue for hard determinism, as I think I would probably want to do, you know, what happens with that? You have to start arguing for the kind of almost illusory nature of the self as any kind of initiator, as an effect, a user illusion, as one of our guys called, Tord Trandas calls it. You know, the idea that the self becomes a kind of figment of its own imagination, part of the causal chain, a little feedback, a little re-entry loop, a little vortex that's formed in the flow of the universe. You know, and we start having to use phrases like yourself, Corey, Professor Anton does. A person, a self, is a moment in place and time of the universe. You know, which again sounds terribly poetic and mystical. But again, I would say this. I'm probably mischaracterising you there, Corey, because I don't think you do argue for determinism or anything like the way that I've just described. But that's the kind of phrase you would need to use, or you might find yourself using, if you were arguing that this thing we call a self is not an initiator of action in any meaningful physical sense. It's you know, it's just a little bit of a knot in the various strings that hold the causal nature of the universe together. It ends up sounding like that. It ends up sounding like we are a moment in the space and time of the universe. So yeah, I'm just really worrying me too much. But it's just an interesting observation that particularly those of us who consider ourselves hard determinists, I think, I'm very tempted to portray ourselves as the logical scientific ones who shun all of that mystical language and don't have any truck with quasi-religious theological talk. But we do, you know, you push into its logical conclusion, it goes right there, it starts to sound like Taoism, or starts to sound like some versions of Buddhism. I don't know. There's only one thing happening and we are all ineluctably welded to it. Capra.